Good afternoon, everybody. Um, I'm here to talk about how to leverage the defense offset policy to promote civil aviation manufacturing in India. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. So first of all, we have to understand that why is India on a sustained procurement cycle of defense equipment. So essentially, we have not very friendly relations with a few of our neighbors. And most of our equipment is of Russian origin, decades old, which means that these two reasons will contribute to the fact that for the next 2 decades or more, India would continually keep buying defense-related equipment and also hope to indigenize some of that. So India is a long-term market, and we have proof for that. Next slide. Uh, this is a snapshot of where some of the manufacturing facilities are in India, and this covers land, aerospace, and naval systems. There is a thought that a lot of the manufacturing capability that resides in India is concentrated in the southern portion of the country. To a certain extent, that is true, but as this map shows, it's fairly widespread. Most of these are government institutions, but if you see the large number at the bottom, 24,500, that's just an estimate. These are the vendors of the defense public sector units, and in some form or the other are doing manufacturing relating to the defense sector in the country. Next slide, please. So, offsets. We've discussed briefly, but I just want to give you a few highlights of the defense offset policy, which was introduced in India in 2005 and has been currently evolving. We've had policies in 2006, in 2008, and then 2011. The policy says that if India purchases any defense equipment from a foreign vendor worth 300 crore rupees, which is roughly 65 to 70 million dollars, which means all defense contracts are covered under it, offsets are applicable. The percentage of offsets, there is only a minimum percentage which is provided, which is 30%. There is no cap on the higher level. And India's largest defense deal till date, the medium-range multi-role combat aircraft, which Dassault has recently won, that has an offset requirement of 50%. So the minimum is defined. There is no maximum which is defined. It is up to the discretion of the MOD to decide how much offsets are to be applicable. But it's not something which pops up right at the end of the negotiations. It's clearly mentioned in the request for proposal. I won't talk about much of the rules except the last point, that there is a penalty of 5% on the unfulfilled portion of the offset obligation. A large company might think that, look, I'm going to earn quite a bit of money from the contract, so if I have to pay a 5% penalty, it really doesn't matter. I think I can afford that. But 5% might seem like an innocuous fake figure, but let me just explain it to you a little bit, and probably you'll take the offset policy a little more seriously after that. Dassault has a $18 billion program for the MMRCA, so which means they have to do $9 billion worth of offsets. And let's say they have to do it in 9 years. So simple arithmetic says $1 billion worth of offsets a year. So in the first year, they say that, I'm sorry, I could only do $500 million worth of offsets. Not a problem. The MOD says you can give me 5% of the unfulfilled portion. That's 5% of 500 million. That's about $25 million. Is fine. That's okay. I can live with that. Now the next year they have to now do $1 billion plus $500 million more from the previous year. Now imagine if they do only 50% of that. They'll pay 5% on that, and it'll keep carrying forward for the next 10 years. So 5% might be an innocuous figure, but when it adds up every year for the next 10 years, it's a lot of money. So I would suggest you take the offsets quite seriously in India. How can you do the offsets? In 2011, the Ministry of Defense permitted that besides defense products, products related to civil aerospace and internal security would also be permitted to discharge offset obligations. I'll show you a list of the items which are there. If you see the bar in yellow at the bottom, most countries either have a direct offset policy or an indirect offset policy. In an indirect offset policy, generally you can build a hospital, a college, an airport, and that qualifies as offsets. And on a direct offset policy, you are confined to the platform to which you are supplying. So General Dynamics would be confined to the tank. and they couldn't do anything on board a naval ship or an aircraft. But India follows a middle path. We don't want hospitals and colleges and airports. We, however, will not restrict you to the platform itself. You can do anything in the categories mentioned of defense, internal security, and civil aviation. Next slide, please. So what are the methods of discharging offsets? The ones that I have highlighted in red are related more to civil aviation. So we have direct purchase of eligible products, we have execution of export orders, and direct purchase of eligible services. Defense services or eligible services are mentioned on your right. So if you are taking any of these services from an Indian company, and an Indian company means 26% or less FDI in that for offset purposes. Less than 26% or less foreign investment in that company, only that company can be an eligible Indian offset partner. If you have 27% foreign investment in a company, I'm sorry. Microsoft India cannot do offset work. IBM India cannot do offset related work. So you can use any of these services: maintenance, overhaul, upgradation, life extension, engineering, design, testing, defense-related software, quality assurance, training, including simulators. Buy these services from Indian companies, and they will qualify as offsets. Offset banking was introduced in 2008. The Indian MOD said that, look, we know and we appreciate the fact that defense procurement in India takes 5 years on a good day. So why do you want to wait till the time when you sign the contract? You can, in anticipation of winning a contract, start executing offset-related work. And you can bank it, which means that you do the work, you submit the relevant paperwork to the MOD, and they'll assign a specific number, they'll approve the project, and you can attach it to a future program, and the offset credits are valid for 2.5 years. So you attach it to any RFP which you want to bid for in the next 30 months. And those offset credits will remain valid till that program remains valid. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Okay, how can you discharge offsets? So besides these services, as I said, there are products. So in 2011, products for internal security were permitted, and civil aerospace products. These are specific products, so not generic in nature, clearly mentioned in the policy. So you have all types of fixed wings as well as rotary wing aircrafts, airframes, aero engines, components, aircraft design, technical publication, raw material and semi-finished goods, flying training, and 13 categories of defense products which have been going on since 2006. Next slide. So now I'll talk about something about the Indian aerospace defense manufacturing market characteristics. Usually, globally, the suppliers are divided into OEMs, Tier 1, Tier 2s, and Tier 3s. Yes. So OEM, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3s, that's how globally we know the aerospace industry as. In India, it's a little bit different. Next slide. In India, we only have, the private sector was only permitted into defense manufacturing in 2001. And most of the defense manufacturing is concentrated in the defense public sector units, and which was the OEM. The Tier 1s and Tier 2s never really developed in the country. And what we did have was that each of these defense public sector units had upwards of 2,000 to 3,000 vendors who would supply very small components to the defense public sector units, who would then act as system integrators and do some manufacturing as well. As a result, a whole chunk of Tier 1 and Tier 2 players never got a chance to evolve in the country. That is changing slowly now, but not at the required pace and nowhere near global levels. Next slide, please. So if we see the defense production life cycle from design, prototyping, build to print, build to spec, maintenance, and upgradation, most Indian companies are in the build to print category right now. It's only some of the government institutions such as DRDO and its laboratories which are into design and development and some degree of prototyping. Most Indian companies are in build to print. Some of them are moving into build to spec and also into upgradation of Indian platforms, but it's still a lot needs to be done. Next slide, please. So just summarizing the market characteristics, 70% of the budget is used on imports. There's not a whole host of opportunity for private players today, but we hope that changes. In the value chain, I'd just like to say that at present, we do not have any internal availability of aerospace grade raw materials. It's all imported. So we are really looking forward to some manufacturers of raw materials who would set up shop within the country and satisfies the demand. Most Indian players are small, $10 million or so, but they are very optimistic. They hope to double revenues in the next 3 to 5 years. Certification is an issue. It takes a lot of patience and time, and Indian manufacturers need to appreciate the fact that it's required to truly do global level manufacturing. Next slide. Next. So the market opportunities are outsourced work packages and offset work packages. But if you really want to succeed in the long run, then what you have to do is that you have to integrate yourself into the supply chain globally. So even if India is not buying a particular platform and Indonesia is or Australia is, it should have Indian products within that platform. Next slide. These are just some examples where some of this global supply chain integration has happened. HAL, Tata Sikorsky, Dynamatics, Centum Electronics, Alpha Tocol, BEL, etc. Next. This is just an interesting snapshot of India as an auto manufacturing hub. And at Ernst & Young, we've done a research and we found that auto manufacturing companies have a head start if they wish to move into aerospace manufacturing, and we would promote the fact and be very helpful if any foreign companies are interested in setting up joint ventures with such companies in India. Next. This is just the supplier rating scale and how you move from the yellow category to the green, and this is what India needs to do to become a preferred vendor. Next. Something about Ernst & Young. We provide services in the aerospace sector for market entry, partner identification, offset advisory, funding for your joint ventures within India. Thank you.